I didn't flinch. The moment her palm connected with my face, sharp and unapologetic, I didn't even blink. I let the sting bloom, hot and angry, across my cheekbone and settle into my jaw like it had every right to be there. The room was silent, save for the quiet hiss of the espresso machine behind her. She went right back to sipping her coffee, eyes flicking to her phone like nothing had happened. Danica Vale. My wife, the golden heiress of the Vale luxury brand, the woman whose name bought silence, smiles, and seats at elite tables, had struck me. And I just sat there, staring straight ahead, refusing to give her the show she wanted. No anger, no fear, just stillness. She leaned back in her velvet armchair like she was posing for a magazine cover. Everything around her was curated. The antique mirror over the marble fireplace, the white roses that matched the trim on her silk robe, the soft piano music floating from the hidden speaker system. This was her kingdom, and in it, I was just an accessory she was tired of wearing. My parents walked in moments later. Timing was never their gift. My father's eyes hovered for a second on the purpling welt rising beneath my left eye, the skin flushed and tight. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it. My mother's gaze narrowed, then dropped. She sighed, like my pain was an inconvenient truth best left untouched. "You're the college dropout husband," my father muttered as they passed, not looking at me. "Don't react." And just like that, they kept walking. No fury, no questions, no outrage, just resignation. Like they had already accepted that I was the problem. Like my shame had been baked into my name from the moment I signed the marriage certificate. Danica tilted her head, that smirk stretching across her face like a ribbon pulled too tight. "Polite little family you've got," she murmured, swirling her spoon around the edge of her cup before setting it down with the softest of clicks. "No one's going to save you, you know. Not them. Not anyone." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because somewhere between the sting and the silence, something inside me stopped asking to be saved. I stood slowly, ignoring the way my legs felt heavier than usual. The room felt colder now, or maybe it was just the clarity settling in. I walked past her, past the velvet chair, past the subtle trace of her perfume that always lingered in the air like entitlement. My fingertips brushed the edge of the marble counter as I made my way to the hallway mirror. I stared at my reflection, studied it like a stranger. My eye was red, beginning to swell. My jaw was tight. But it was my expression that startled me most. Not the pain, but the absence of fear. I used to think enduring made me strong. I used to think that walking through fire without screaming meant I had courage. But standing there, looking at my bruised face under soft recessed lighting, I realized something else. Strength isn't silence. It isn't swallowing pain like pills. It's refusing to be reshaped by someone else's cruelty. It's drawing a line in the velvet carpet and daring the world to step over it. Behind me, Danica's laugh rang out like wind chimes, sweet, hollow, designed to decorate the air without meaning. I walked away, past the room where her designer shoes lined the walls like trophies, past the glass case that held her awards and accolades, past the life I'd helped build but never been allowed to own. In the guest room, my room now, I sat on the edge of the bed and touched my cheek. It still throbbed. But I was wide awake in a way I hadn't been in months. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. A message from my sister, Aria. Just a heart emoji. She didn't know what happened today, but she knew me. She always did. I stared at that little glowing icon like it was a life preserver. Because Aria was the reason I dropped out of college. She was the reason I worked night shifts and gave up internships and missed my graduation. She was dying, then healing, then recovering, and I never left her side. But no one asked about that. No one cared. Especially not Danica. She had a narrative that didn't include sacrifice. In her world, I was just the guy who couldn't finish what he started. I lay back and stared at the ceiling. The molding up there was custom, of course. Imported. She made a show of that to every guest who toured the house. Italian craftsmanship, she'd boast. You just can't get this kind of detail anywhere else. I wondered if anyone had ever looked up long enough to care. The door creaked open, and I didn't even turn my head. Danica stood in the hallway, arms crossed, robe tied too tightly around her waist like she was holding herself in place. "You going to pout in there all day?" she asked, voice sugary and sharp. I didn't answer. She stepped in, paused near the dresser, and tapped a framed photo. The two of us at our wedding. She looked radiant. I looked hopeful. Now it felt like a lie. A snapshot of a version of me I didn't recognize anymore. "You're still here," she said. So whatever you're trying to prove, you haven't proven it yet. I sat up. My voice was calm. I'm not trying to prove anything. Not to you. She raised a brow. Then what are you doing? I stood, walked to the door, and gently closed it between us. That was my answer. That slap didn't shake me. It woke me. The funny thing about silence is how loud it gets when you're the only one forced to hear it. No one ever asked why I hadn't finished college. Not once. Not at our wedding. Not at any of the Veil galas or family brunches or charity galas where I was paraded beside Danica like a decent-fitting blazer, functional, presentable, but replaceable. It wasn't polite dinner conversation, I guess, to ask why the groom's degree was unfinished. Certainly not in a world where titles and legacies mattered more than the truth behind them. But if anyone had asked, I would have told them. I left college because Arya was dying. Stage 4 lymphoma doesn't wait for finals. It doesn't care about GPAs or credit hours or the promise of a diploma. I dropped out because I was her only family that didn't fold under pressure. My parents could barely afford her medications, let alone the time it took to care for her. So I picked up 2-night jobs, security and warehouse, slept 3 hours a night, learned to change IVs, soothe vomiting, and keep someone alive with nothing more than stubborn love and sheer will. But none of that showed up on my resume. It didn't count in Danica's world, where accomplishments had to be curated and framed in gold. She knew, of course. I told her when we were dating. Late nights on my battered couch, her legs draped over mine, eyes soft, voice low. She had listened, back then. She even cried once. But something shifted when the ring slid onto her finger. Somewhere between her father's handshake and the first time she introduced me as just Malik, she stopped seeing the man who gave up everything and started seeing the man who had nothing to show for it. The first bruise wasn't visible. That's the thing no one warns you about, how the invisible wounds come first. Words shaped like concern. Suggestions. Corrections. Then mockery, cloaked in teasing. Danica had a talent for sculpting shame from affection. "You're so sweet," she'd say in front of friends. "Just don't talk too much around investors, okay? You get passionate." Laughter would follow. Gentle. Controlled. But the cut would stay. "Don't bring that up at dinner," she'd warn. "It's not your scene." Slowly, she eroded me. Not with hammers, but with sandpaper. Smooth enough to pass for love. Sharp enough to sting. By the time the real bruises arrived, I was already trained to hide them. The one she gave me that morning, though. This one she made sure I couldn't hide. We were in the hallway, arguing over something small. I think it was about the catering list for her mother's birthday, or maybe it was the way I had spoken to the delivery guy. That's how it always started, with something minor, something ordinary. I said I didn't like how she corrected me in front of her staff. I said it made me feel belittled. That was the word I used. Belittled. She turned, eyes sharp, voice syrupy. "Oh, Malik. You don't get to feel belittled when you've never stood tall." Then she stepped closer and whispered, "Men like you marry women like me to level up. Don't forget that." I opened my mouth to respond honestly. I don't even remember what I was going to say, but before I could speak, she slapped me. Hard, sharp, calculated. And this time, it wasn't in the privacy of our bedroom or behind closed doors. This time, it was in the hallway. This time, the housekeeper was around the corner. This time, the chef paused mid-chop. This time, she didn't hide it. She wanted it seen, witnessed. I stood frozen. My hand didn't rise. My voice didn't lift. And that, I think, annoyed her even more. She stepped back, adjusted the cuff of her blouse, and smiled like she just wanted to bait. "You should really put some ice on that," she said casually, walking off like the slap was nothing more than a suggestion in a meeting. I went to the bathroom and closed the door behind me. I looked in the mirror, not just to assess the damage, though it was there, blooming red and angry, but to search for something deeper. I wanted to find the line, the one where I became someone I didn't recognize, where silence turned from strategy to surrender, where love twisted into loyalty and loyalty into fear. The line wasn't behind me. It was beneath me, and I was done standing on it. I dabbed at my cheek with a cold cloth, the sting pulsing with every touch. It wasn't just skin deep. It radiated through me, igniting something ancient in my bones. Not rage. Not even grief. Clarity. I stepped out of the bathroom and went to our room. Her side of the closet was pristine, color-coded, coordinated by season. My side looked like a rushed guest luggage. I grabbed a hoodie and slid it over my head, partly for warmth, partly to hide the mark. Not out of shame, but out of strategy. Let her think I was still quiet. Let her believe I was still that tame version of myself she'd sculpted. Let her underestimate me a little longer. In the guest room drawer, I opened the small black notebook I'd kept hidden for 6 months. In it were names, dates, photos. Times she screamed at waiters. Names of house staff who quit in silence. One driver even sent me a message last year. I pray you get free, sir. No one deserves what she does to you. I never responded, but I screenshotted it. Saved it. Everything mattered now. Danica may have built an empire out of curated luxury, but I had been building something too. Not for revenge. For freedom. Later that evening, at dinner with her parents, she laughed loudly at a joke her mother told and reached for my hand beneath the table. I didn't pull away. I let her fingers graze mine. She wore her usual mask, charming, radiant, perfect. But this time, I looked deeper. I saw the edges of it crumbling. I saw how her laughter didn't quite reach her eyes. She wasn't just hiding what she did. She was hiding who she was becoming. She had the smile of someone who knew their reflection was cracking. And I had the calm of someone who no longer needed to explain why. My father once said, "Be grateful a woman like her chose you." He said it on the night of our engagement party, drink in hand, his voice thick with pride that had nothing to do with me. He wasn't looking at me when he said it. His eyes were on Leonard Vale, Danica's father, laughing across the patio with other men in monogrammed suits and inherited egos. To him, that night wasn't about my happiness. It was about proximity to power, to old money, to relevance. My father didn't toast to love, he toasted to access. And my mother? She smiled tightly all evening, I scanning the crowd like she was afraid someone might ask her what I brought to the table. Not a degree, not a company. Just a history of sacrifice no one bothered to ask about. Grateful. That word stuck like gum on the soul of my life. I was supposed to be grateful that Danica Vale, with her net worth and name-brand bloodline, decided to marry me. Never mind that I was the one who stood by her when her mother nearly died of a heart attack. Never mind the nights I cooked for her when she was too drained from work to lift a fork. Never mind the sacrifices. Those were invisible. Because in the eyes of people like my parents, like hers, those things didn't carry weight. A last name did. The morning after the slap, I went to the mirror again. I had gotten used to it. This quiet ritual of examining myself like a detective looking for signs of weakness. The swelling had started beneath my left eye, a gentle ballooning that promised to get worse before it got better. But the decision? That had been swelling much longer. I opened the drawer in my room. The envelope was still there, thick, creased, heavier than it looked. It was the kind of weight you carried in silence until the day you didn't have to anymore. Inside were documents, screenshots of her emails to Reese Keller, her personal attorney, and the architect of every NDA she made the staff sign. I had copies of 2 contracts she made a former chef and housekeeper sign after they witnessed her throw a baccarat glass at my head during a dinner party. One of them had quit the next morning. The other took the payoff. I found her confession in a voice memo she left on her phone one night while recording notes for her therapist. She didn't realize it synced to the cloud. "I hit him again today," she said, voice tired but void of remorse. And he didn't even raise his voice. He just looked at me. Why does that scare me more than if he'd screamed? That audio clip lived on 3 different devices now. I'd sent it to myself, to a burner email, and to a USB drive stored in Aria's apartment. I wasn't stupid. Danica Vale could buy silence with the swipe of a pen. But not this time. And then there was the deed. The crown jewel. When we got married, she put both our names on the deed to the Laurel Street property. I remembered thinking it was symbolic, a gesture of partnership. I didn't realize then that she'd only done it to keep me quiet when her PR team tried to rebrand our marriage as a grounded, wholesome love story. After her 3rd cover in Lux Living, she quietly filed papers to transfer ownership solely to herself. She never told me, but I had friends. Friends who still worked in real estate law. Friends who owed me favors. One of them tipped me off. So I filed a claim to block the transfer. Reinstated my share. She never noticed. Never asked. The document sat in my file, signed and sealed. It wasn't just about leaving anymore. It was about standing. I looked around the room. Her design was everywhere. She insisted on redoing every space after we got married. "We can't have people thinking I'm married down," she once said with a wink. That was her way, cruelty wrapped in flirtation. She replaced my worn brown couch with a sleek Italian leather sectional that no one was allowed to sit on. Swapped out my bookshelves for sculpture pedestals. removed every photo of Arya and me, replacing them with fashion editorials she'd been featured in. The entire house was an aesthetic lie, a showroom, and I had become the background noise in it. My phone buzzed Arya again. Another heart emoji. That was her thing. It meant, I'm thinking of you, but won't push. She knew. Not the whole story, but enough to understand that I was unraveling in someone else's curated life. She had begged me, more than once, to leave. But I wasn't ready then. I was still trying to prove something. Not to Danica. Not even to myself. To the ghost of the man my father said I should be. A knock at the front door snapped me back. Not the quiet knock of staff. Not the hesitant knock of someone unsure. This was sharp. Direct. Danica called from the sunroom. Get that, will you? The command was soft, like I was still hers to direct. I walked past her velvet throne, her perfectly staged morning brew, her legs crossed in the same effortless grace she wore for magazine covers. I opened the front door without checking the camera feed. Detective Marlon Briggs stood there, his badge clipped neatly to his jacket, next to Officer Tasha Ikandeo, her expression unreadable but focused. They nodded in unison. Mr. Malik Vale? Briggs asked. I nodded once. Just Malik. Danica rose in the distance, her mug hovering midair. Who is it? She called. I didn't answer. Officer Ikandeo handed me a folder. Not thick, not dramatic. Just official. I tucked it under my arm and stepped aside to let them in. Danica was already on her feet, walking toward us, her expression warping from mild curiosity to wary calculation. What's this? She asked, smoothing her robe like that would shield her from truth. When I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my own file, the thick envelope, worn at the corners. She stopped walking. Her eyes dropped to it like it was a grenade. Her voice cracked. Where did you get that? And just like that, the first crack in the foundation appeared, not in the walls, but in her. The moment she realized I wasn't flinching anymore. The moment she understood that silence had switched sides. 30 minutes. That's how long I stood there after they left, Briggs and Ikandeo, watching the back of the front door like it might open again. Not from fear. Not even from hesitation. But because something inside me still couldn't believe I had done it. That I had handed over evidence of abuse, blackmail, coercion, and control, all tied up in one thick file that had lived in a drawer for months like a secret waiting for its own heartbeat. That I had pulled back the curtain on a life so carefully staged, it had even fooled me for a while. Danica hadn't said a word when the officers walked out. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She just stood there, frozen in her silk robe, eyes fixed on the file in Briggs' hand like it was a weapon forged from everything she never thought I'd have the nerve to use. The moment they left, she retreated to the sunroom again like nothing had happened, like the morning hadn't cracked through the floor beneath her stilettoed feet. I didn't follow her. I sat in the guest room, my room now, and waited. Waited for the guilt to show up, maybe the fear too. But they never came. Not this time. There was only stillness. The kind of stillness that follows a storm you didn't know you started. I leaned back in the chair by the window, the same one I used to use when I needed quiet away from her monologues, her demands, her sharp-edged praise that always left a cut somewhere. My fingers trembled slightly, not from nerves, but release. The house was silent, save for the occasional click of her heels pacing somewhere beyond the walls. She was calculating now, rewriting the narrative. She wouldn't go down easily, not Danica. She'd try to outmaneuver this like she outmaneuvered everyone else. I could already hear her voice rehearsing the story. He was unstable. A jealous man. I tried to help him, but he turned vindictive. She wouldn't scream at first. She'd whisper, plant seeds, weaponize sympathy. She always preferred surgical strikes to explosions. But this time, I wasn't unarmed. And then came the second knock. Not tentative. Not loud either. Just firm. 3 quick taps, measured and sure. I stood slowly. The back of my neck tightened as I approached the front door again, hand hovering over the handle. My heart ticked faster, not in fear, but in awareness. I opened it, and there they were again. Briggs and Ikandeo, this time without file folders or formalities. Danica's voice called from behind me, saccharine and sharp. Who is it now? I stepped aside without a word. They entered. Briggs gave me a short nod, his eyes scanning the room like a man who'd seen too many stories unravel in homes that looked too perfect. Ikandeo didn't smile, but there was something different in her eyes this time, something like respect. She held a small tablet in her hand, thumbs swiping across it as they moved past me, and into the open living area. Danica was still in her chair, coffee refreshed, legs crossed as if she were hosting brunch instead of a confrontation. She looked up, lips twitching at the corners. "Well, this is a surprise," she said, her voice that clipped blend of elegance and warning. "Did my husband forget to mention something in his little folder of fiction?" Ikandeo said nothing. She walked to the corner of the room and turned on a small recorder. Briggs spoke. "Mrs. Vale, we're following up on the statements provided earlier. You have the right to remain silent." "Oh, please," Danica scoffed, standing up and raising her chin. "Don't insult either of us with theater." Briggs didn't flinch. "Then perhaps you'll want to sit down for this next part." Danica laughed, a short, cold burst. "I have nothing to hide." I stepped forward and pulled something from the inside of my coat. A second envelope. Thinner than the first, but heavier in consequence. I handed it to Ikandeo, who opened it carefully, her eyes flicking down to the photos inside, printouts of documents, screenshots, recorded calendar entries, all linked to hush agreements she'd drawn up herself. Some signed, some forged. Danica's mouth opened, then closed again. And then I pulled out the last thing. The USB drive. I handed it to Briggs, who nodded and slid it into the side of the tablet. The audio clicked on, low at first, but sharp. Her voice. I hit him again today, and he didn't even raise his voice. Why does that scare me more than if he'd screamed? The room went still. Danica's hand trembled, and for a moment, her expression cracked. Just slightly. Enough to see the human beneath the mask. Then her knees gave out. She dropped, catching herself on the armrest of the chair. Her coffee spilled, dark liquid soaking the white rug beneath her. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. No one answered, because the silence said enough. Her breath came in shallow pulls now, fingers twitching as she tried to reach for her phone on the table. Ikandeo stepped forward and gently moved it out of reach. "Not rough, just final." Briggs turned to me. "We'll be in touch once we review the full contents." I nodded once, throat dry. Danica looked up at me, eyes wide with disbelief. She had always counted on the myth of her invincibility, that her last name, her smile, her polished narratives could shield her. And maybe they had for a while. Maybe I had helped her, by staying quiet, by absorbing the damage without complaint. But those days were over. As Briggs and Ikandeo turned to leave, Danica spoke again. Her voice was smaller now. "You won't win, Malik. You don't know how this world works." I didn't respond right away. I crouched slightly, so our eyes were level. Her makeup was smudged. Her mouth trembled. But it wasn't fear I saw in her eyes. It was unfamiliar territory. I spoke quietly. "Maybe I don't know your world, but you never understood mine either. The world where love isn't leverage and silence isn't consent. The world where walking away is a win." I stood and walked past her, past the spilled coffee, past the frozen pose of a woman realizing she'd finally lost control. When the door closed behind the officers again, it didn't echo. It felt like release. Like a door that opened, then finally stayed open. The silence that followed wasn't gentle. It didn't settle in like peace or comfort. It pressed against the walls of the house, thick and jagged, a vacuum of sound that made every breath feel too loud. Danica didn't cry. She didn't scream. That would have been too messy, too real. She just sat there on the edge of the armchair, her legs pulled in like she was trying to occupy as little space as possible. The coffee stain on the rug had already begun to darken, soaking deeper into the fibers, spreading outward in a way that almost looked poetic. A perfect image of how truth moves, slow at first, then irreversible. I stood in the doorway of the living room, watching her without blinking. She looked up at me once, but not the way she used to. No smirk, no command behind her eyes. Just confusion, like someone trying to recognize a place they thought they owned. "You think this changes everything?" she finally asked, her voice dry, not from emotion, but exhaustion. "You think they're going to side with you?" "I don't need sides," I said. "I need truth." She laughed, short and bitter. "Truth is what the world believes, not what's real. And you." She looked me up and down, her lip curling slightly. "You're not believable. That used to work on me. That kind of statement, wrapped in velvet and dipped in venom, used to make me question myself." She had a gift for that, making doubt feel like logic. But not anymore. I stepped into the room slowly, every footfall deliberate, and sat in the armchair across from her. For a moment, we just stared at each other, a tableau of what our marriage had become. Two people occupying the same space, breathing the same air, but living entirely different lives. You always thought silence was your weapon, I said. You used it to starve me of affection, of answers, of dignity. You used it to erase me one unspoken rule at a time. You thought I'd keep quiet forever. Danica crossed her arms. You had a comfortable life. I tilted my head. Comfort is not the same as peace. She looked away. You were weak. You never pushed back. I gave a slow nod. That's what scared you the most. That I took it. That I stayed. Because you couldn't break me loud, so you tried to drown me quietly. She opened her mouth to speak again, but the words stalled. Her jaw tightened. Then she stood up and walked toward the window, her back to me. You don't know what I've dealt with. What I've carried to build this name. The pressure. The expectations. I didn't know. Maybe not the exact details, but I knew what it was like to carry weight no one applauded. To survive things you couldn't explain without being called dramatic or damaged. But I didn't interrupt her. Let her talk. Let her fill the silence she used to weaponize. You think those voice memos will make people care? She asked, turning slightly, her tone rising. You think a few bruises and some conveniently recorded clips will undo the empire I've built? I stood up now. Slowly. Not to threaten. Not to prove anything. Just to level the ground between us. No, I said. But they'll expose what you thought no one would ever see. And I'm not the only one. She blinked. What does that mean? It means others are coming forward. People who were silenced, bought off, intimidated. Some of your staff. Your ex-driver. Even one of your assistants from 2 years ago. The one you fired after she saw you throw a vase at me. She froze. You don't have proof. I don't need to, I said quietly. They're telling their own stories now. The silence doesn't belong to you anymore. Danica stumbled back a step, just one, but enough to betray the fear that finally slipped through her mask. I wasn't screaming. I wasn't slamming doors. But the quiet I carried wasn't hers to control anymore. It was my own, and it was louder than anything she'd ever heard. A knock came at the door. Not the police this time. Her attorney. Reese Keller stepped inside, crisp and sharp in his charcoal suit, briefcase in hand. He paused when he saw me, then turned his expression to Danica like she was a client on the edge of collapse. Let's talk, he said, already scanning the room, calculating. Danica nodded numbly and followed him to the study, closing the door behind them. I walked to the kitchen, made myself a cup of black tea, something I hadn't done in weeks in that house, because even routines like that had been monitored, judged. Too bitter, she used to say. Try something softer. As if even my taste in tea needed reshaping. I sipped it slowly and leaned against the counter. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then Reese came back out alone. He didn't look at me when he walked past, just muttered, "You'll be hearing from us." I nodded. Danica didn't come out again. That night, I lay in the guest room, still the only space in that house that felt remotely mine, and stared at the ceiling. The silence still hovered, but it wasn't hers anymore. It wasn't a cage. It was air. Heavy, but mine. I picked up my phone. 2 new messages. One from Aria. Saw the post. "I'm proud of you. So damn proud." And one from an unknown number. I worked for her for 6 months. I thought I was crazy. "Thank you for speaking up." I didn't cry, but I felt something loosen in my chest. A knot I'd carried for years, unraveling at last. She had begged me not to go through with it. She tried everything, tears, threats, even called her mother to mediate. They offered money, spin control, private arbitration. But I had more than evidence. I had conviction. She once bankrolled silence like it was an investment. She bought off voices, erased dissent. But what she never understood, what people like her never understand, is that truth doesn't need an audience. It just needs the right moment. And tonight, in the thick, raw quiet of this house, the truth was louder than her name had ever been. The invitation arrived 2 days later. Hand-delivered, cream-colored envelope. The Vale family crest embossed in gold at the top, like royalty, was calling court. Inside, elegant cursive script read, "Dinner at the estate. Formal. Family only." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The whole thing reeked of Leonard Vale's brand of control, calculated, cold, and cloaked in civility. It wasn't really a dinner invitation. It was a ceasefire proposal, a photo op, a damage control maneuver dressed up as a family meal. But I accepted. I wore a black blazer over a charcoal shirt, the kind of ensemble Danica used to approve of: clean lines, understated power. Except now, I wasn't dressing for her. I wasn't dressing for acceptance. I was dressing for truth. My truth. And I brought it with me, neatly tucked inside a flat black envelope. Thinner than the one I gave the police. Sharper. When I arrived at the estate, the valet took my keys without a word. No welcome, Mr. Vale. No smile. Just that slightly nervous glance, like he wasn't sure if I was still part of the fold or a ghost returning to haunt the mansion. I walked through the front doors without needing direction. I had lived here, after all. I knew every marble tile, every gilded picture frame, every chandelier designed to make the poor feel poorer. The dining room was already full when I entered. Leonard at the head, of course, flanked by Danika's mother, Adrian, and two of her uncles. Danika sat to the right, looking composed, in a crimson dress and gold earrings that matched her chilled exterior. When she saw me, she blinked once. No smile, no greeting, just that tight expression she wore when things slipped out of her hands. Leonard stood, arms wide like a host on a cooking show. Malik, glad you could make it. Let's sit. He didn't offer a handshake. That was telling. I took my seat at the opposite end, placing the envelope beside my wine glass without a word. Dinner began as expected. Lobster bisque, beet salad with goat cheese, steak medallions on a bed of garlic mash. Every bite was seasoned with tension. Adrian spoke about a new spa opening in Aspen. One uncle talked about supply chain hiccups in one of their retail sectors. Danika? She sipped her wine like she was in a music video, detached and flawless. No one acknowledged the scandal. No one asked me how I was. It was all theater. Until Leonard finally put down his fork, cleared his throat, and gave me the floor. So, Malik, he said, voice smooth but clipped. We understand there's been friction. Emotions can run high in any marriage, but we're family. And family sorts things out internally. He glanced at the envelope. I let the silence stretch just a little longer than necessary before answering. That envelope, I said, nodding toward it, contains evidence that contradicts what your daughter's PR team has been spinning for the past week. Leonard's expression didn't change, but Adrian blinked like someone had just turned on a bright light. Danika didn't move. I continued. It includes financial reports showing misuse of Vale family funds to pay off staff and silence witnesses. It includes testimonies from 3 former employees who were either bribed or threatened. And it includes records of internal communications between Danika and her lawyer, documents you weren't supposed to see. Leonard let out a dry chuckle, but there was no humor in it. You're bluffing. I slid the envelope down the table like a poker chip. Then read it. Danika's hand twitched, but she didn't reach for the envelope. Her father did. He opened it slowly, pulled out the contents, and began scanning. The room fell into a strange, suspended stillness. The kind that happens just before a building collapses. The rustle of paper. The clink of Adrian's fork on her untouched plate. The soft hum of classical music playing from the ceiling speakers, completely out of place. Leonard's eyes hardened as he flipped through the pages. And when he looked up at his daughter, something had shifted. Something permanent. Is this true? He asked. Danika tilted her head. It's exaggerated. Taken out of context. One of the uncles, Raymond, I think, reached for a page and began reading it himself. This is your signature, Danika, he said, tapping the paper. This is a signed directive to wire hush money from the Vale charity account. Her voice was icy. I was protecting the brand. I did what needed to be done. By abusing your husband? Leonard's voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed. And in this family, that was worse. Danika laughed, but it cracked in the middle. Oh, come on. We all do things to protect our images. Don't you dare pretend outrage now. This isn't about right and wrong. This is about who got caught. Leonard didn't respond. He just stood up and handed the envelope to Raymond. Then he looked at me. I was wrong about you, he said, voice tight. I thought you were dead weight. I stood, pushing back my chair quietly. I was the one carrying the silence. She just assumed I'd never let go. I turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. And for what it's worth, I added, I didn't come here for revenge. I came to give you the truth. What you do with it, that's on you. As I walked down the hallway, I could feel their eyes on my back. The man they thought would crawl away quietly was walking out on his own terms. I exited the mansion and inhaled deeply. The air outside tasted different. Cleaner, like I'd shed the weight of years in a single breath. The valet handed me my keys wordlessly, but this time, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Respect. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let the music fade in low. Jazz. Something Arya had gotten me into. Something Danica always said lacked ambition. I turned it up. As I pulled away from the estate, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Some places, once left, don't deserve a glance back. And for the first time in years, the truth sat beside me. Not as baggage, but as freedom. They sent Reese again, of course. He always delivered the bad news wrapped in polished language and paperwork thick enough to bury any protest. He showed up the next morning at my apartment unannounced, dressed in his usual shark gray suit, tie straight, breath minty, eyes cold behind tortoiseshell frames. The knock was crisp, 3 exact taps. I almost didn't open the door, but I did. I wanted to look him in the eye when I said no. Malik, he greeted me with a shallow nod, as if we were business partners meeting over a disagreement and not a lawyer arriving to sweep a history of abuse under the rug. Mind if I come in? I do, actually, I replied, stepping out and closing the door behind me. Say what you need to say. He gave me a smile that didn't touch his eyes and pulled a manila folder from his briefcase. This is a proposed settlement. Confidentiality agreement attached. A generous offer. How generous? 7 figures. Immediate transfer. No court. No press. You sign, and we bury everything. It's a chance to move on, clean and clear. I didn't even glance at the document. And in exchange, you retract all public claims, delete any shared evidence, and agree to a non-disparagement clause, he said, like he was reciting a weather report. You go your way, she goes hers. Everyone wins. No, I said flatly. His brow twitched, just slightly. You might want to think about this. Offers like this don't last. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I'm not for sale, Reese. That was always her mistake, thinking everything had a price tag, including people. He tilted his head. Everyone has a number. I did, I said. It was my dignity. She already spent it. He studied me for a long moment, as if trying to decide if this was a bluff. Then he slipped the folder back into his case. She'll go public, Malik, he warned. She'll spin this. You know the media loves her. You'll be painted as bitter, manipulative, unstable. Then let her, I said. She's the one who left bruises, Reese. I just left proof. He gave me a long, unreadable look before turning to go. This could have been easy, he muttered. I don't do easy anymore. When he left, I stood in the hallway for a few seconds, letting the moment settle. I didn't feel victorious. I felt solid, grounded. Like for the first time, I'd stepped fully into my own skin. 3 hours later, I posted everything. Not in rage, not out of spite, but because truth deserved light, not storage. The video was short. A 5-minute voiceover with redacted names for protection, but detailed accounts. The audio of Danica's confession. Screenshots of the NDAs she forced staff to sign. Proof of misused funds. I ended it with a simple message. This isn't revenge. This is release. If you've been through something like this, you're not alone. You're not weak. And you're not crazy. I didn't attach my face to it. I let the story stand on its own. It didn't need my name. It needed ears. By nightfall, it had over 500,000 views. By midnight, several former employees had commented anonymously, confirming the patterns, echoing the control, the threats, the quiet payoffs. One account even uploaded a resignation letter they'd written but never sent, dated 3 years ago, citing Danica's violent emotional outbursts. The letter ended with, "She's untouchable. I just want out." The story moved faster than I expected. Blogs picked it up. Independent journalists started pulling at threads. One fashion outlet ran a muted headline, "Whispers Beneath the Velvet, a closer look at the Veil Empire." Danica didn't respond. Not directly, but the Veil brand did. A carefully worded statement hit their official page by morning. It read like a lawyer's lullaby, deeply concerned, committed to truth, actively reviewing claims. Danica's name wasn't in it. Neither was mine. But the shift had started. You could feel it. The brand no longer stood behind her. It stood apart, waiting to see if she'd fall. My inbox filled. Some messages were supportive. Survivors. Strangers. People who just needed to say thank you. But others, not so kind. Anonymous threats. Accusations. Claims that I was bitter, trying to take her down for money or revenge. But I didn't respond. Because I didn't need to defend the truth. I just needed to protect it. That evening, I took a walk by the river. There was a little spot near the edge, quiet and mostly empty, where Arya and I used to sit as kids, skipping stones and pretending they were messages to the future. I sat there for a long time, watching the water shift under the orange glow of streetlights. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the version of me that Danica had tried to reduce. I felt like myself. Arya called around 9. I put her on speaker and just let her talk. I saw the video, she said, voice shaking slightly. You sounded strong. Not angry. Not bitter. Just right. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me, I admitted. They didn't need to believe you, she replied. They just needed to hear you. And you made them listen. We talked for an hour. Laughed. Cried. Remembered. She told me she'd reached out to some of the staff I mentioned and offered to help connect them with support services. That was Arya, turning wreckage into something useful. After we hung up, I stood at the edge of the water and let the silence surround me again. But it was different now. It wasn't suffocating. It was sacred. Mine. Danica had spent years buying silence, paying off discomfort, erasing stories. But not this one. This one lived. It had roots now. And her money? It couldn't buy the ground it grew from. 3 days after the video went live, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't saved, but knew by heart. The screen read, unknown caller, but I could hear her in the silence before I answered. Danica always had a rhythm to her timing, strike when the fire dies down, when the crowd takes a breath. And this was her breath, her moment to pretend none of it stuck. I let it ring twice before I picked up. Malik, she said, and it startled me how quickly my name left her mouth like it still belonged to her. I didn't answer. She waited a beat, maybe 2, then launched into it. We need to talk. I know things have escalated, but we can fix this. Together. I nearly laughed. Fix this. Like it was a publicist's typo on a press release. Like all the bruises, the gaslighting, the silencing of staff, the misuse of funds. Like they were nothing more than a PR hiccup she could iron out with the right lighting and an apology invoke. Her voice softened. We were good once, Malik. Don't forget that. And I didn't. That was the problem. I remembered everything. I remembered how good she was at being good, when it served her. When I was useful. When she needed my loyalty, my silence, my body beside her at galas to look grounded and romantic and generous. But it was always conditional. My worth measured in how invisible I could make myself. I'm offering you peace, she said. A deal. We end this quietly. No more press. No more stories. You take a settlement, and we both walk away with our names intact. My name is already intact, I said. She paused. I could hear her breathing now, slow and measured, like she was trying to decide which version of herself to use next. The charming one? The strategic one? The broken one? I checked my accounts this morning, she said. Now we were here. They're frozen. Still, I said nothing. Why? Her voice was smaller now, that frightened edge creeping in. What did you do? I leaned against the counter. The window opened beside me, letting in the sound of traffic far below. You remember the Laurel Street property? A beat. Of course. The deed was never fully transferred to you. You filed the paperwork, but you didn't check the final counterclaim. I blocked it before it cleared. She cursed under her breath. I sold my share, I continued, and I flagged the charity funds as suspicious through a third-party watchdog. The moment the report hit their system, they flagged your business accounts. Routine audit followed. Compliance sweep. Nothing personal. You've ruined me, she hissed, the mask finally slipping. No, I said calmly. You did that when you started treating people like currency. You always wanted power. Is this it? Do you feel strong now? No, I said. I feel free. The line went silent. For a long time, I thought maybe she hung up. But then she said something I didn't expect. I'm scared. And for a moment, I believed her. For the first time in all the calculated smirks and carefully composed interviews, she sounded human. But I didn't respond with comfort. I didn't offer her peace. Because she never offered that to me when I was scared and voiceless in our shared home. When I walked on eggshells, praying I wouldn't upset the storm inside her. When I kept quiet for years because I thought silence was the cost of keeping her love. So I just said, goodbye, Danica. Then I hung up. I stared at the phone for a while, the call log blinking like it expected something more. Like it couldn't believe it ended so quietly. But sometimes silence is the loudest goodbye. I walked to the small safe beneath my bed and pulled out the last of the files, ones I hadn't released. Not because I was afraid, because I didn't need to. They were insurance, not for revenge, for peace of mind. If she tried to retaliate, if she tried to smear me beyond repair, I had the means to protect myself. But part of me hoped she wouldn't. Part of me hoped she'd take the silence for what it was, closure. Later that night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, music low, lights off, and I scrolled through the messages I'd received since the video. One from a man in Oregon. She sounds like my ex. I thought I was crazy until now. Thank you. Another from a woman in Barcelona. I work in fashion. I always wondered. You gave me language for things I couldn't name. They poured in. Stories. Gratitude. Pain. Liberation. And I understood something I hadn't before. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had echoed into other people's lives, carved open silence, and handed back dignity to strangers I'd never meet. That mattered more than money, more than clearing my name. It was the antidote to the lie Danica had lived by. That silence can be bought, and power means never answering for pain. A knock came at the door. I didn't expect anyone, but I got up and opened it. It was Arya. She held up a paper bag, Thai food and zero judgment. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat on the floor, eating pad thai and laughing about how I used to think lemongrass was a shampoo ingredient. We talked about everything, about the weight of it all, the stretch of healing, the strange shape of new beginnings. And at one point, she looked at me and said, "You know, you look different." How? Like a man who isn't waiting to be chosen anymore. That hit harder than I expected. Because for so long, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. Waiting to be seen, accepted, validated. By Danica, by my parents, by a world that never cared about the why behind my story, only the surface. But now, I wasn't waiting. I wasn't hiding. I was building something. Not to prove a point, just to live. Danica would go on. Maybe she'd spin the story. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she'd learn. Or maybe she'd just rebuild the facade. That wasn't my concern anymore. Because now the only account that mattered was the one I had with myself. And it wasn't frozen. It was finally open. It started with a knock that didn't belong. Not sharp like Reese's legal summons. Not calculated like Danica's. This one was hesitant. 3 uneven taps, like the knocker wasn't sure if they should be here at all. I had just finished washing the dishes. The window cracked open to let in the river breeze. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people texted or called first now. After the story broke, my world shrank to people who cared enough to check in, and those who wanted to use me for their own narratives. I had filtered out the latter. But this knock? It didn't fit either group. I opened the door. There stood my father. Behind him, my mother, arms folded, a purse clutched tightly beneath her elbow like it was a shield. My father looked older than I remembered, lines deeper, posture slightly stooped, like the last few months had aged him faster than the years before. His gaze landed on me, paused, and then shifted somewhere past my shoulder, as if he needed time to process that I wasn't behind Danica's gates anymore. "Can we come in?" he asked. I stepped aside without answering. They entered quietly, my mother's heels clicking softly against the hardwood. She took in the apartment, the clean but modest layout, the scent of lemongrass and sandalwood that lingered from the incense I lit that morning. No marble floors, no custom wall art, just simplicity. She didn't hide her discomfort. My father, on the other hand, looked around like he didn't expect it to feel like home. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," he said as he sat on the edge of my couch. "I almost didn't," I replied, leaning against the wall across from them. There was a long silence. Not the cold, weaponized kind Danica used, but the thick, awkward pause between people who'd ignored too much for too long. My mother looked at the window, anywhere but at me. My father rubbed his palms against his knees like he was working up to something. "We saw the video," he said finally. "All of it." My jaw tightened. And? "And we were wrong," he said, the words dragging out like they weighed more than he expected. "About her. About you. About everything." I didn't let it wash over me like redemption. I let it sit. Because forgiveness is not a reflex. It's a choice. And some things have to be spoken aloud, even if they sting. "You didn't protect me," I said. My mother looked down. "You protected your pride. Your reputation. You cared more about how it looked for your son to be married into money than how it felt to watch him disappear inside that marriage." My father's mouth opened, but no words came. "I came to you bruised," I continued. "Not once. Several times. I came to you when she screamed at me in front of the staff, when she threatened to make sure I'd never be more than a footnote. I asked for your help. You said things were difficult, my mother began. I said I was hurting. I snapped. And you told me to be grateful. You said I was lucky. She flinched, and for the first time, I saw it land, not just as shame, but as grief. The kind of grief that comes when you realize you were complicit in someone else's silence. I didn't know how to handle it, she said. We come from a world where men don't talk about things like that, where they endure. I shook my head. Enduring isn't the same as living, and silence isn't strength. My father stood, slowly. He walked toward the window and stared out at the river, the same view I watched when I needed to remember who I was. When I married your mother, I thought love was provision, stability, never rocking the boat. That's what I passed to you. And it almost killed me, I said quietly. He turned. I know. Those 2 words, simple, unadorned, cut deeper than any apology. He walked toward me and held out a small, square box. I brought this. Your grandfather gave it to me when I got married. I was going to give it to you on your wedding day, but I didn't think you needed it. Thought Danika's world had already given you more than I ever could. I opened it slowly. Inside was a modest silver ring, etched with our family crest on the inside. Nothing flashy, just a quiet token of continuity. You still see me as your son? I asked. Always did, he replied. We just forgot how to show it. I looked at the ring for a long time before closing the box. I'm not who I was before. You should know that. We wouldn't be here if we thought you were, he said. My mother finally spoke again, softer this time. Do you remember when you were 12 and fell off your bike down the Ridgehill steps? You came home scraped, bleeding, crying. I rushed to clean you up, but you told me not to call Dad. You said, he'll just tell me to walk it off. I remember, I said. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I kept this. A letter you wrote after that. You never gave it to him. You tucked it in your bookshelf. I found it years later when we were moving. I took the envelope, unfolded the paper slowly. My handwriting, slanted, messy, emotional. I just want Dad to see me. Not the boy who cries, not the one who falls, but me. I don't need him to fix everything. I just need him to show up. My throat tightened. I think we failed you long before Danika did, she said. There was no dramatic reconciliation after that. No group hug. Just quiet. Honest. And in that stillness, something shifted. I saw them as people, not just parents, but individuals shaped by fear, silence, and their own unresolved stories. And maybe, just maybe, we were finally writing a new one. I poured them both tea. We sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge the only sound for a while. Where do you go from here? My father asked. I don't know, I admitted. But I know what I'm not going back to. And that's enough for now. They stayed for an hour. We talked about Arya, about childhood, even laughed once, when my mother tried to use my cheap electric kettle and nearly broke the handle. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When they left, my father paused at the door. You don't have to forgive us now, but I hope someday you let us earn our place again. I nodded. That's fair. They walked away hand in hand, small, uncertain steps, but together. I stood in the doorway for a moment longer, watching until they reached the street. Then I turned back inside. I wasn't the same man they'd once dismissed. I wasn't the quiet, shrinking version of myself Danika had tried to reduce me to. I wasn't the boy waiting for someone to choose him. I was becoming someone who held his own pain, his own power. Someone who could say no and still love. Someone who could open the door without losing himself in the process. The silence in my apartment didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. And when I looked in the mirror later that night, I didn't flinch at my reflection. I stood taller, not because they apologized, not even because the world believed me now, but because I believed myself. And that, more than anything, was the weight I had waited to set down. A month later, I found myself standing in front of the mansion I used to call home. I wasn't there for revenge or closure or any of the neat little bows people try to tie around endings. I was there because I happened to be walking through the neighborhood. No plan, no theatrics, just there. Life has a way of looping back around, giving you a quiet glimpse of your former self from a safe distance, just to see what you'll do. The Vale estate still looked pristine. The hedges sculpted to unnatural perfection. The cobblestone driveway scrubbed clean. Even the brass gate shone like it was polished with ambition. But it felt different now. Hollow. Like someone had taken the soul out of the place and left only a showroom behind. I stood across the street, hands in my pockets, watching without feeling much. That surprised me. I had expected some kind of ache, a pang of loss, maybe even rage. But what I felt was emptier than all that. Like looking at a picture of someone you used to know, but no longer miss. Then I saw him. He stood by the gate, young, trim, probably in his early 30s. Fresh suit, well-fitted. Eyes a little too eager, too shiny. He was holding a bottle of champagne in one hand, glancing up at the mansion like it held promises he hadn't yet learned how to be afraid of. The gate opened, and Danica stepped out. She looked exactly the same. Impeccable. Polished. Like the months hadn't touched her at all. But I knew better. You don't lose that much control and come out unscathed, even if the scars are invisible. She smiled at him, perfectly rehearsed, and placed her hand on his arm as they turned toward the entrance. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just watched. And all I could think was, I hope he has a plan. Because charm isn't safety. Money isn't peace. And beauty doesn't equal kindness. I had learned that the hard way, in slow, painful increments until I was nothing more than a shadow dressed in tailored clothes. Danica didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, I didn't linger. I turned and walked away. These days, I live by the river. A small wooden apartment with creaky floors and paint that chips near the windows, but it breathes. It holds peace in its walls, not performance. I built it with intention. No extravagance. Just comfort. Just clarity. My mornings are quiet now. I wake to the sound of water brushing the bank, to the sunlight leaking through gauzy curtains. Sometimes I go for walks before the city stirs. Sometimes I write. Just fragments. Thoughts, memories, pieces of healing. No audience. Just me. There's a single frame by my bed. A small black square with white lettering on plain paper. It reads, "Just because they didn't fight for you doesn't mean you're not worth fighting for." That quote used to make me ache. Now it makes me breathe. I remember the days when I measured my worth by the way others treated me. When my father's silence cut deeper than words. When Danica's praise felt like oxygen and her disapproval like suffocation. I lived so long trying to earn love that I forgot it wasn't supposed to be earned. It was supposed to be given. Freely. Fully. Without conditions. The man I am now wouldn't have lasted in that world. Not because he couldn't, but because he'd choose not to. The mirror above my dresser is cracked at the corner. It came that way. I left it. Not because I couldn't replace it, but because I liked the reminder. That imperfection doesn't mean broken. That damage doesn't mean useless. That you can reflect light even with a flaw. Most days I feel lighter. Not weightless, not invincible, just lighter. The kind of light that comes after a long storm, when the air is clear and heavy with possibility. Arya visits often. She brings books and candles and recipes she found online but refuses to follow. We laugh more now. Real laughter. The kind that comes from a place untouched by shame. She told me once, "You didn't just survive her. You remembered yourself through her." That stayed with me. I didn't just walk away from Danica. I walked back to me. One day at a time, one breath at a time, one decision after another. I built routines, boundaries, spaces that felt like mine. I stopped explaining my choices to people who never asked about my pain. I started learning how to enjoy silence again. Not the kind used as punishment, but the kind that wrapped around me like a warm blanket after years of cold shoulders. Sometimes I get messages from strangers, from survivors, from people who've read the story and found a piece of themselves in it. I respond when I can, not to relive the pain, but to remind them that freedom is possible, that the path out doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be real. I don't chase closure anymore. I don't need Danica to apologize or the world to validate what I endured. I've seen who I am without their approval. And I like that man. He's steady. He's quiet, but not small. He's scarred, but not ruined. He is not afraid of his own reflection. So, when I pass mirrors now, I look, not to check if I'm presentable, not to see if I've hidden the pain well enough. I look because I want to see him, the man who refused to disappear. I see the lines etched from strain, the softness that's returned to my eyes, the strength in my shoulders that comes not from holding everything in, but from finally letting everything out. This is who I am now. And for the first time in a very long time. That is enough.